All right, so we, as you probably saw, the ominous countdown clock ran out. So hopefully everybody is kind of concluding their conversations there. We are going to kick off now with the takeaway portion of this, so everybody gets a good flavor of what the different conversations were at each of the tables. And we're going to kick off actually with our two tables that shared the same topic, which is Trustworthy AI. So I'm going to give them probably like 1 minute unless they feel like they're ready to go. So the idea here is just for the table leads to come on up, give about a 5-minute summary of the conversation, some of the big takeaways that came from the discussion, so everybody can really have that opportunity to take away different best practices and some of the solutions and opportunities that exist out there. So when the Trustworthy AI tables are ready, they'll come on up. How did that first session go for everybody? Good? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's always good to, like I said at my table, to get that opportunity. You know, we had NIH sharing some best practices with DoD, with ARPA-H, industry as well. It's always good to get the different ideas that exist out there, on different topics. I mean, we were talking about cybersecurity, and that's certainly a major issue, and especially around data security. So I think Raj and Jesus are ready. So without further ado, come on up here, and I'll hand over the mic to you and let you guys take it from there. I think since we're going to have two, we're going to give you guys 10 minutes, so extra time. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Raj Dasgupta. I'm a research scientist at the Naval Research Laboratory, and I was leading one of the tables of Trustworthy AI. And here with me, I have Jesus Caban. I will let him introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Jesus Caban. I'm the Chief Data Scientist for Defense Healthcare Management Systems, where I oversee a lot of data science projects across the enterprise.
Thank you. So we'll jump right into the findings of Trustworthy AI. So the prompts are the questions that both of us discussed about. There were 4 facets of Trustworthy AI that we discussed. Security and trustworthiness of the data is the first one. Different aspects of the data, like how to make the data clean and structured. The second aspect. The third aspect that our groups talked about was testing of the models and the data of the AI. And finally, we looked at intellectual property and privacy issues of the data. Okay. So I will summarize the main takeaways from our table. So one of the themes that kept coming through and through is the interface between the AI and the end human user that is there. And the different CEOs, CIOs, we had CAIO also in our table. The point that everybody made and we all agreed upon is that humans first need to, like the end users or the stakeholders, first need to talk among themselves, decide among themselves, and come up with a plan of how they plan to leverage the AI and how to make these AIs of the different systems, of the different components, talk with each other, so that the AIs can understand each other. And central to that is that the humans who deploy those AIs, who use those AIs, they should be able to talk to each other, speak the same language, and understand each other. So basically, the human component of AI is central in Trustworthy AI. Okay. Another important point that was brought up in our discussions was how to deal with the blind spots of AI. Basically, when we're talking about trust, the way an AI usually is compromised by an adversary is by exploiting the blind spots that it has. So we discussed about different technology that are there to mitigate these blind spots. And one of the interesting points brought up in our table was when we are trying to ensure trust, there are 2 important metrics to consider there, namely efficiency and cost. So these sort of form a triad together. That is, if you increase trust, you might be increasing cost as well, and efficiency might be going down. So depending on the use case, depending on the application, we need to balance these 3 aspects, trust, cost, and efficiency. And many aspects like collapse of the model from data and so on. And this led us to the discussion of the third point, which is the data. How do we make sure that the data is clean and structured? And one of the overarching themes that came across is that we need to make sure all the data that we feed into the AI system, especially safety critical AI systems, we need to make sure what the lineage of the data is. We're able to prove what the source of the data is. Subsequent to that, tools like AI data cleaning tools, which like cluster the data, transform the data, tie the data to existing data can be used. But one of the most important things we have is to make sure what the lineage of the data is. We are dealing with lots of data, unstructured data, so basically technologies out there to make sure that the unstructured data is fed appropriately into the AI. We ingest all the data, but we ensure that, as I said, lineage of the data and audit of the data as well. Okay. Throughout these discussions, an important topic that kept coming back again and again is how does Gen AI fit into all of this? Because now we are not just looking at human-generated data, but we are looking at large quantities of machine-generated data as well. And with Gen AI, it's becoming very difficult to make sure which piece of data is coming from a human versus which piece of data is coming from a machine. So brainstorming, one of the things that we talked about is we need to appropriately mark the data. Just as in security documents that are there, data blocks are marked appropriately with the appropriate audit, with the appropriate clearance level. Similarly, data that is being fed into Gen AI systems or any AI systems for that matter should be marked with appropriate markings. And we don't yet know what those markings are. So that's new standards which need to be come up with so that we can prove where the data came from, what the lineage of the data is. And not just at the input end of the Gen AI, but also at the output end of the Gen AI, so that when later systems are using the output of Gen AI, we are able to trace back and say what the lineage of the data is. Okay. So pretty much, I'm reaching the halfway mark. Pretty much that's what we talked about. But the overarching theme that we came across in our table is basically we need to have a source of clean data, source of structured data, so that we can mitigate the risk and improve the trust that we have in AI systems. Okay. Thank you. Then I will hand over to Jesus.
Okay, so I was at the second table talking about trustworthy AI. We have a diverse group there, from lawyer to student to IT vendors. So we came up with 7 topics. We started in the topic of privacy and saying that AI is moving faster than privacy laws. So therefore, there was a nice quote that is like, we have this illusion of privacy, but is it privacy? Because it is true. When doing trustworthy AI, we need to consider the privacy components of it. That's where the conversation started. Then we move into, when we use these AI system, machine learning models, predictive models, it's about the accuracy, reliable. Can we replicate the results? So that was number 2. As in order to move the organization to be trustworthy, utilizing trustworthy AI, accuracy, reliable, replicable, and so on. The next one, number 3, was transparency of the training data. That is important. What data was used to train these models? Also, a key component of the trustworthy AI. Number 4 was the bias and the ethics of the system. And having any organization to be able to embrace trustworthy AI, having a mitigation strategy for bias. So we had a good conversation about that topic. Number 5, we talk about the security. All the different kind of security measures that we need to have in place to be able to deploy, especially in enterprise, like where I am, big enterprise around the world, being able to deploy these models, security is critical. So then we talk briefly to tools such as the Atlas MITRE has. You can Google for Atlas MITRE, that has hundreds of potential security areas that the cybersecurity team should check. We talk about transparency of the intellectual property. Should we be using the models from the United States because they're protected and they have IP versus the from other countries and so on. So keeping in mind the IP associated with these models, how they're being used, and so on, also a key component of the trustworthy AI. And then number 7 was part of the governance. What is the governance of deploying, testing, and deploying and keeping track of these models? And then one idea was there that at the prompt level, we always have to have a filtering so we understand what goes in and what comes out, and having filters for that to make sure that we follow trustworthy AI principles. And then we wrap up with challenges. What have been the challenges of embracing trustworthy AI across federal space, across agencies, across organizations? And one of them, it was government fails to capitalize on the data. We have a lot of data, I can tell you. I oversee a lot of data around the world for many years. And yes, I agree with that. I failed sometimes, many times, to capitalize on the amount of data that we have. Also, policy versus technical. There was a conversation about in the government, yes, so we need to put policies and DODID, instructions, operational instructions, and so on. Therefore, do you go with the policy guy? Do you go with a technical guy? Do you go with a person that knows both? And then the importance of removing silos. And then we wrap up there. The importance of, from the CIOs to the CDOs to the chief AI officers and others, to be on the same page to make sure we all embrace trustworthy AI together. So that was the conversation of table number 2. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Way to kick that off. Just so everybody knows too, we're gonna have a quick Q&A session at the end too. So if anybody has any questions for the tables, jot them down on those papers in front of you, and I'll jump up and we'll have kind of a round table or a round robin of a Q&A session there. All right, next we're gonna have table 3 come up. It's gonna be data privacy up here. So come on up. Where's table 3? There we go. Got you, Katrina. Oh, wonderful. No problem.
That's awesome. Right, good morning, or is it afternoon? Not yet. I'm Katrina Brisbane, former Senior Procurement Executive and Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of Health and Human Services, just like barely, not even a month retired, to be honest with you. So excited to be here. We had robust discussion. Thank you. We had a robust discussion on data privacy. It has so many angles and pieces and parts. And so I'm going to cover, we had 4 real key topics that we discussed on, and I'm going to just cover them and then go into what it is that we actually covered on these particular areas. So the first one, we started off with the conversations on what are some data privacy challenges that we see when it comes to AI tools and their development. And so the team at table 3 actually said the encryption of data is an issue. Also, tools that identify the differing types of data, for example, PHA and PII. There are also, I understand from one of our vendors at the table, that their company has some tools that helps to potentially do some of the marking of this data, such that as it goes through an AI training model, those data pieces are marked and identifiable. Understanding vulnerabilities and where that information is located. And then what data is the AI learning from, and what are users feeding the AI model? So setting a security posture in 2 directions is very important. And then where do we draw those boundaries when we're trying to contain the data? And then there are also use cases that require PII. We often shy away or prohibit the use of PII in our various AI models, but there are those that need to have the PII in the containment of that information. And how are they being governed? So the governance models that actually are structured where PII is needed. And then how do we train AI models such that we can use them cross-government? We had health agency examples that we discussed. And those health agency examples are, they're using the same data in most cases, but one requires the use of certain information while the other ones require different information. So how do we make sure that we're consistent? The second question we talked about is how do current AI mandates consider privacy? And I'm just going to be very direct and upfront. The team at the table, we all agreed that at this point, both industry and government remains in a place of awaiting additional information and understanding it better. Did I do good with saying that? Yeah, good. In other words, we are still a little bit in a round robin of what is going to come out as a framework in government and how are government agencies now going to really understand their use cases such that they can communicate it to their industry partners, as well be able to understand what information can we share and what controls do we need to place on that information. So that is needs some more structured guidance. There has been rescissions of executive orders, changes in policies, and so right now we're in a place where, as a government as well as industry, really need to make sure that there is some structured guidance coming out from the federal government to ensure that everyone's on the same page. The third question is, what role do vendors play in data privacy when partnering with the government? So the team talked about vendors should be testing their own models, data accuracy should be ensured, benchmarking their own models, and testing for biases to be able to demonstrate that to agencies. Next, the team also discussed specifying data ownership and data sovereignty. That's very important. And then finally, the government, and this is for government folks in here, please take this, I'm an acquisition executive, so this is very personal. Government must state explicitly the usage of data obtained by the hosters of that information and vendors, and not just ownership, who owns the data, but what can be done to use it, if it's used. And that comes from unauthorized data collection or utilizing information that's been collected in an unauthorized manner. And then finally, the last question was on how agencies should build requirements for data safeguarding. And so one is auditability, checks and balances. Data should be ensuring the data is safe when shared. Explainability, what is told to the AI and what is the AI telling us back? Cautioning against reverse engineering of what the model has been programmed as prohibited responses. And then assurance requirements, checklists, and standards for AI models. Boy, did I go over 28 seconds? Sorry about that. All right. I was going to say, oh, I'm within time, but it turned red. All right. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks, Katrina. Okay. All right. All right, so we're going to have another two-table situation here on Gen AI, which was a very popular topic in terms of requests. So we're going to have Captain Clark and Brian Hens come on up and share some of your takeaways.
Okay. Check, check. Okay. All right, I'm Captain Clark. I work in the Deputy Commandant for Information Service Data Office. I'm the AI lead for the Marine Corps. So I have the pleasure of sitting at table 4. And then sir, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Brian Hens, DHS Senior Science Advisor for AI, part of DHS Headquarters Science and Technology, and I was at table 5.
Okay, I will try to keep my time to 5 minutes. And so we talked about 3 main things with generative AI: how your organization is using generative AI, how you can achieve trust with those generative AI systems, and then what types of training and education are you seeing as valuable to employing these systems. So we've got kind of 6 bullets that we came up with here as the key takeaways. The first one is not something that I came up with or our table, but it's from an article. I apologize, I can't remember which one, but It's along the lines of amateurs talk tactics, experts talk logistics. In AI, amateurs talk experimentation, experts talk adoption. It's great to have experimentation and we need it, but we can't feed 1,000 flowers. We've got to adopt some of those flowers. And that's hard, it's challenging. And that's kind of, I think, where we're a lot of, at least on the DoD side, where we have a lot of experimentation taking place, and we need to drive adoption. And a lot of that is through change management. So focusing on the augmentation and not replacing of human capital. So we need to ensure that our systems are. Is this on? Okay. We need to ensure that our systems are augmenting those, in my case, Marines, to be able to do their job better, faster, and taking a lot of the dull, mundane, redundant tasks away from them so they can focus on, again, in the case of the Marine Corps, fighting and winning wars. And so not replacing them, but augmenting them. And doing that through inspiration. And that was kind of one of the things that resounded at our table was we've got to make this fun, interesting. A lot of the stuff that needs to happen in data and generative AI and AI in general, machine learning, is not interesting. But we need to find ways to make that interesting so that we can train and educate our force and our workforce or our federal force. So they understand the risk, they understand the expectations of those systems. So another one was good data in, good data out, bad data in, bad data out. So again, with these large language models specifically, they're trained on massive amounts of data. We don't always know, and I think in most cases we do not know the data that has gone into training those models. And that's a concern. That's something that, there are a few solutions, at least trying to, chip away at that problem. But it's a major concern that, especially as we use them in critical systems or in decision-making processes that could have significant impacts, we need to understand the data that those models are trained on, and we need to ensure that the data going in is good data to make good results that we can trust. Human in the loop and human on the loop, so including the subject matter experts in the process. In many cases, these AI systems are not going to have the final say. Or at some point within the loop, we need to have a human who understands the expectations of those systems and can interpret the results and ensure that they are in line with the expectation for those systems. And then use case specific applications. So it's great to have a general purpose capability, that's important. But we found that we can have a lot more trust in the system if we have use case specific applications. So integrating it into a workflow to have a human machine teaming effect so that we have other systems involved and other components of that system that we trust, and we have the large language model as the brain that gets injected into that, but then we have the trustworthy system that does the important part of it, is another piece. In a lot of cases, it may be expensive to have that general purpose chat capability when we can have a fine-tuned model that does something very specific and that is much smaller and much more cost-effective. And then the last thing here is governance. We heard it already. Governance is key. The policies, the standards, and the frameworks. A lot of that, we're kind of paving the road as we go. The Marine Corps, we just published our AI implementation plan. It was a challenge because there are not a lot of implementation plans out there for AI and specifically generative AI. And so we're building the plane as we fly it. It's a challenge. We're gonna, some things aren't gonna be right, but we need to get the policies, the standards, and the framework in order to do all of the things that we're talking about here today.
Thank you. And so at table 5, we had a good mix of government and industry people. We covered the same high-level topics as table 4, and I want to start actually with the training and the workforce preparation for deploying generative AI. Just like has been discussed before, the exposure of the workforce to the use of generative AI and hands-on experience. And so within DHS, actually, we deployed DHS Chat, which was really just a vanilla ChatGPT. And then as people started using it, they asked for workspaces. Then they asked to be able to store their workflows and share it with their coworkers. And so a lot of great ideas have come out of that. So just really getting it into the hands of the users, and then engaging early adopters, making sure that once they are comfortable with it, that they're telling the other people that they work with how nice it is. And then training the workforce includes not just the people that are using it hands-on, but the senior leadership. So having a tiered training so that everybody understands what are the challenges, what are the potential benefits of generative AI. On the area of trust, the first thing that came up was transparency, AI use case inventory, but also talking about the data, how the AI is going to be used within the workflows, maintaining mission readiness. So as we have a workforce reduction for the public trust, how do we maintain all of the missions that we have with that reduction in workforce? And so that's capturing that corporate knowledge, ensuring that we have diversified and representative data sets as we train data with train models to be used within our missions and to ensure the public trust. We want to make sure that those are representative of the people that are going to be making decisions about. And then on the topic of accountability and risk acceptance, certainly we need to understand there's no illusion of secrecy. All of our data has probably been out there and the models have been trained on that. And we want to ensure that the models that we're using are contained within our own environment or to make sure that the data is not leaking out. There's a need for validation within the government. Although the vendors and other people are providing AI tools and capabilities, ensuring that we test and evaluate those with the mission data that's going to be used within the government, using multiple AIs, so having multiple AIs give decisions and ensuring that we're not just depending upon one, and then also identifying what are the consequences of a bad decision of this AI, and that goes into the human in the loop and human on the loop. At what point are we comfortable taking the human out of the loop? It could be depending upon the consequences. If there's low consequences, maybe that's the point to do it. And so there was discussion on that. And then within use cases, this was an area that we kept coming back to throughout all of our discussions. There was a lot of discussion of existing use cases and ideas for new ones. So some of the ones that are already being used with a great benefit are help with predictive maintenance, identifying when we can go a little bit longer before we need to replace a part, the allocation of resources, and one that was kind of neat coming up from our table is the use of AI for public communications. So taking that GAO report and generating a video for TikTok or something to make it exciting and digestible to everyone. So I think there's a lot of potential that we can look forward to. That's all I had. Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much, guys. Next is going to be Table 6, Risk Management. We had 2 table leads on that. So if I could invite Martin Stanley with NIST and Jamie Fitzgibbon with DIU to come on up, or just one. It's up to you guys. We'll let you go from there.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Martin Stanley with NIST, AI and cybersecurity researcher. I run the AI Risk Management Framework program there. I think I've probably met with a lot of you over the years. It's great to be here. So our topic, surprisingly enough, was risk management. And we had 4 main questions. The first was, what does risk management mean to your organization? And is it just risk to data or kind of information you're trying to protect or not performing your mission? That was the first question. The second question was related to the recent executive actions, OMB memoranda, and how those are impacting your agency. And then has your risk threshold changed in conjunction with the modernization, tech advancements, or has it stayed the same? Are you still using your same risk management approach, or have you updated your policies and approach? And then the last one, last question, people, policy, technology, how is your team trained around AI? What resources do you have to manage this across the organization? And what are you putting in place to make sure that your folks know how to use the technology and the capabilities that you're deploying? So the first question related to what does risk mean in your organization? And the second sentence here is it risk to data, exposure to classified information, or is it about not performing? And I think all of us would answer that question the same way, which is yes, it's everything and then more. AI risks are, derived from the enterprise risk management function, which are risks to mission. And so as we're looking at understanding the risks of deploying AI within our mission space, we have to have a comprehensive understanding across the mission space. What are the benefits? What are the opportunities? That led us into a discussion about how we enumerate those risks and how we manage them within our organizational risk tolerances. We refer to this as we're looking at expanding our guidance at NIST as a trade space. So you have benefits and you have risks in a bunch of different dimensions, and how do you look at those in one comprehensive picture to figure out exactly what kind of determination is right for your organization. And I think the last risk is one that we really have to highlight, which is the risk of not innovating, because we have so many opportunities in front of us to use technology, and we have to make sure that we're making the right decisions about where we have the biggest impact. So the second question, what notable efforts do you see happening around recent executive actions? This is OMBM 2521 for the most part, I think. And good news, everyone at our table that works at a federal agency can report that they've appointed a chief AI officer, and they're putting together an agency AI governance board, which are the actions required within the first 30 and 60 days. But also, I think there's an understanding that we have to figure out how do we report the beneficial impacts, and we measure the return on investment, how we're moving the key performance indicators in our mission, and delivering the promise of these solutions. That's something that's required in the OMB memo, and I think it's something that's going to challenge agencies to try and take those technological risks and technological benefits and translate them into their impact on the mission. With 1 minute left, has your risk threshold changed? I think absolutely what we heard was there's an increased innovation, particularly that's driven by being able to prioritize, which is informed by understanding these benefit risk determinations. We want to have the biggest bang for the buck. And then the last question, people, policy, technology. How is your team trained around AI, and what resources do you have to manage this across the organization? So I think there's a lot of gaps here, and it's compounded and confounded by the fact that there's such a pace of change. I think it's something we have to think about from a risk management perspective. We want to prioritize use cases, things that we can have a big impact, but we can also manage and train the people that are going to be involved in it, train the organization, train our mission in order to ensure that we're delivering. I think of this, as at least a baseline of having maybe a cybersecurity type model for training, where we've got sort of general user training, we have role-based, we also put some mission risk into that. So, and then lastly, we see policies needing to evolve, and the vendor at our table pointed out that they have a lot of answers to this. So don't forget to talk to your vendors about these challenges.
Thank you, Martin. All right, last but not least is going to be my table, the cybersecurity table. So I will invite Jake and Jennifer to come on up here. Jake's with the Navy, and Jennifer with ARPA-H.
Hi, everybody. We were talking about cybersecurity, so the conversation ranged across key challenges for detecting and preventing vulnerabilities, things related to data security, securing models, and also safeguards when we're thinking about both the data and the models. So we started first talking about the vulnerabilities from a traditional cyber sense, so thinking in detail about the detection piece, if you wanted to say a few words about that.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting takeaways for me was kind of the different perspectives that both of us came from in terms of cyber. So coming from the submarine community, coming from military communities, I think more at the edge, where, hey, I've done everything to prevent something from a cybersecurity standpoint, but I can never ensure. There's always going to be a hole somewhere that's there to be exploited. So therefore, the detection bit is incredibly important for uh, in, in theater remediation, but also from an operational standpoint. So both sides of the coin, really, really important. It was just really fascinating, kind of the bubble that at least I can get into in the Pentagon, vice large, large systems.
Yeah, and then we also talked about different aspects related to quantum and how we might take that into account as more types of techniques are coming in, and then to complement the detection side. To what extent can we prevent cybersecurity vulnerabilities from being in our systems writ large? So if we look at what's happening with large language models and the application of them to both detect vulnerabilities and automatically generate patches, can we get to the point where that type of capabilities is in our DevOps process and detecting and fixing vulnerabilities before any of the software is even deployed, so that the type of attack surface that we have today that has kind of a Swiss cheese aspect to it in some cases, can we change so that our standards for eliminating vulnerabilities before the code is even deployed goes up to a completely different level than what's been possible in the past by leveraging things like large language models and some of the tech coming out of efforts like the AI Cyber Challenge. And then we also talked about securing code. So back over to you.
Yeah, the challenge of securing code, one of the interesting takeaways that I had was we're talking about not just the code itself, because those are always going to be updated, but the underlying data. And then we had an interesting discussion of, well, okay, perhaps if you firewall off certain data sets from other data sets, that way you have an intrusion, it's quarantined to that particular area. But that's unique in AI, you get your benefit by having the large set of data. So it's kind of a push-pull kind of scenario that is really, really fascinating. And a little scary that we don't really have a great answer for that, other than determining a way to secure our code as best as we can, just like we do any other thing. But the underlying data sets and how do we maximize the utility out of them by training models, learning, et cetera, tuning, et cetera, but also being able to secure them in the fact that when we inevitably do have those types of bad actors engaging it, to limit the damage of that.
Great. And then that extended to data security. How do we think about protecting different data sets, regardless of whether they're healthcare data sets in collaboration with our partners at NIH or military ones? How are we thinking about the different types of classification, things like anonymization, and also developing techniques to track provenance and other types of data transfers that would create the foundation for things like indicators and warnings, depending on the type of data that we're trying to protect. Anything you wanted to add?
I think the only other takeaway I had, I really have to get close to this thing, was the other thing I did want to bring up was the data poisoning part as well, right? So that's something that definitely concerns me. Definitely with synthetic data generation. We talk about trusted data and garbage in, garbage out, that adage, absolutely 100%. But bad actors can definitely do quite a bit of damage with data poisoning and how that works. So that's just another wrinkle. Like fundamentally, our cybersecurity fundamentally isn't changing. It's just our attack vectors are now exponentially larger, right, and exponentially deeper to deal with in terms of all those places to safeguard and what do we trust and what don't we trust.
Great. And then overall, I think you're seeing a blend of the research to operations aspects here. So continuing to also think about R&D in areas like federated learning in order to be able to make it so that we can address some of the data security aspects and trying to eliminate whole classes of vulnerabilities to make the job on the detection side simpler. That's it for our group.
All right. So hopefully some folks had some questions for the different tables. Amy is going to be over here. She can, we're either going to, Amy and I are both going to work the floor, whether it be asking questions or just handing it to the table leads or whatnot to answer them. So did anybody have an answer that, or that had a question on with anybody? Okay.
Actually, I have two, but I'll start with the first one. So this goes out to the government side. Have any of the government agencies looked at or are using small language models or purpose-built models?
Anybody?
And if not, what is preventing you from doing this?
Okay. All right. For any of the table leads or any of the, or anybody really, have a specific answer? We want to tackle that one? All right, Captain Clark.
Yeah, so in the Marine Corps, I don't know if this is really technically a small language model, but we've done fine tuning of large language models. So one of the areas that we've looked at, we're still doing some experimentation with, is the Marine Corps' after action repository, which is a very large set of after action reports from exercises and operations over decades. And being able to access that is important so that Marines can use that information to make decisions about upcoming exercises and operations. And so we have a Marine who went through a program that we partner with the Air Force called the Phantom Program at MIT and the Air Force AI Accelerator, where where they have already built a large language model to take essentially human natural language, convert it into database query language, get the information out of the after action repository, providing citations. But then he took this model to that program, fine-tuned it, and brought it back, making it significantly smaller, optimized, and specific to the task. So instead of it being a general purpose, open source model, it's now very specific to this very specific task that it does very well, and it's much cheaper. So that's one way that we're looking at it.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Raj, back there.
I actually have a response to the first question again regarding small language models. We are not using, I wouldn't say we, but basically DoD, not necessarily small language models, but the end goal is pretty much the same, which is the approach that is being used in many research projects is to combine large language models with some specific use case defined AI. RAG, chain of thought, these are being used a lot, and also other traditional AI techniques like reasoning and planning. So basically combining, taking the large language model to satisfy the broad general knowledge base, and then combining that with specific AI developed for the use cases. That's sort of being used as a replacement, you can say, for the small language model. And this is driving down costs as well as training time.
So I'm actually jealous. We're not allowed to use anything AI in our agency, policy and all that good stuff.
What agency is that?
Peace Corps.
Peace Corps. Okay.
Yeah, weird, right? So I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands that not all government is government. Like, we're all not the same. So that's all I had to say. I'm still jealous.
So very quickly, to address the question about small language models and so on. So from two perspectives, operational medicine, DoD health side. So yes, we do have a number of ongoing projects. Why? Because at the point of injury in the middle of a different country and so on, we don't have the cloud services or the GPUs you need. Therefore, we have been testing multiple small language models to help at the point of injury. And actually, and the DoD CDAO, last fall, we did a hackathon in Germany. And there's something called that we have Advana Edge, that is for the edge. And that includes large language models, but at the same time, small language models, because we need to deploy. We need to be without connection, without internet, without minimum, what I mean, with minimum hardware. That's why we have been testing a number of those.
Yeah.
So this again goes out to the government community. Any successful use cases on implementing model ops? And if you have, what has been or what have been your top 2 challenges?
Anybody?
To provide more context,
Who? Just lost.
the earlier summary stated something about data poisoning. So model poisoning is a thing. So that's where I was going with the question. If anyone has implemented that, would love to hear about it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody? Does the cybersecurity table want to address that at all? No? Okay, that's fair. All right. Keep on stepping on the side bed.
Hi, has anyone explored, we're talking about cybersecurity for AI, has anyone explored AI red teaming or red teaming for AI systems and models? And if so, could you speak a little bit more to that?
That's going to be a top. Yeah, there you go. Good, very good question. Yeah, Jennifer. One second.
If we're talking about AI models as in being able to answer questions, there's some teams looking into that for healthcare questions. So it turns out about 20% or so of the inquiries that chatbots get are health related, even though they are not approved for healthcare applications. So you can imagine if it gives you false advice, that has some implications, right? So there are some teams that are looking at how do we really scale the ability to test whether the responses for healthcare inquiries are accurate for a select number of use cases.
Okay. Got another question?
You mentioned post-quantum cryptography, and my understanding is the end of last year, NIST put out a framework for 3 different post-quantum cryptography, like sort of approved algorithms. My question is, do you all feel like that's going to be sufficient for the near-term post-quantum cryptography needs, or do you feel like that's going to be an area that evolves some before it's in its final configuration?
Martin, do you want to take that one? No? No problem. Okay.
Thanks. So I don't work on the PQC program, but I will say that my understanding is their criteria, the evaluations will continue as more candidates present themselves. So I think there's an opportunity for there to be additional cryptological models. But the ones that we have are the ones that have met whatever the criteria that was established.
I have a quick question for other federal agencies or industry about governance, AI governance. What has been your lessons learned implementing AI governance within your organization?
Here you
go. Excuse me, from a couple of perspectives, I think this kind of fits your question and the initial question as well. As popular and as important as AI discussions are, it still is presented in mass kind of niche. So you have a high level of expertise within a few people, and there's not an adequate job of socialization across government, industries, and agencies. So when you're looking at governance, you have very few people. So take, for example, CBP, 60,000 people. So when you're looking at establishing policies and procedures outside of those that have been in our existing legislation or the individual policies that have come down from DHS or via NIST, there's so few people that know what those instances are, how to use those, when to implement them, and how to socialize potential problems to advance the policies and the governance. So like when I did an assessment of the existing policies and legislation and took that to senior leadership, they had no idea that there was existing legislation that codified what was acceptable for AI implementation within all of these agencies. So if you have senior leadership outside of, say, S&T that really has no understanding of what this technology is and what those capabilities are, it's almost impossible to establish governance in mass because it's niche at that point, as important as it is. We are on the precipice of mass change to the world, but most of our leadership doesn't have an adequate understanding of exactly what is happening in front of us. We just talk about what DeepSeek did. We just talk about what ChatGPT can do, not understanding that it's happening already. And they're late to the game. So how can you govern something when the people who have the power to implement that aren't paying attention to it?
Okay. Anybody else? All right.
So along the same lines, if they don't understand it, their gut reaction, their first thing to do is say it's not allowed, period. Which then stops us from doing our use cases, doing the analysis, and doing the research into how we can implement it into our environment. So if you guys know those type of people, please bring them on board. That'd be great.
Nope. Apologies. Interestingly, I think sometimes we overshoot the goal by trying to do too much too fast with people who have limited knowledge or capability. So for example, with the existing legislation, existing policies, I think there's sufficient information, there's sufficient guardrails for mass socialization. The development of checklists of when, how, and in what capacity different AI use cases can be individually implemented. So we're going from, like you said, we want socialization, and then you'll get something 2 months later saying that, no, we're not allowed to use absolutely anything. So you're going back and forth because there's a kind of like a lack of confidence and there's a lack of expertise when I think there is sufficient information at even a department level for some degree of implementation. And if we're unwilling to experiment with some simplistic data. So if you make an assessment of this type of data, this is a standardized process that we have in this particular division. And the type of data that is presented in a format which is not classified. It meets the requirements for the AI to be able to read it. And that's how you begin to socialize it. That's how you begin to expand the utilization. And that's how you begin to increase the degree of governance, because everybody has a base level of knowledge that you kind of have to push a little bit to get people to start adopting.
Hi everyone. My thought and question is around the data quality. So as everyone says and agrees, I guess, if the quality of the data is not good, then the results you're going to get from AI and whatnot is going to be also not good, right? So just wondering, like, what is everyone's thoughts on? Do you all see this as another necessity and opportunity to first invest on getting the quality of the data better, before you start, using AI, on the data?
Amy.
Thank you. So part of the data quality, we talked about this at our table, is really looking at the diversity of the data and the unstructured data and how we can essentially clean that to structure it. And part of that is the extract, transform, load. The problem with it is it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? Because as industry, we're trying to clean the data that we have. We have this essentially this iceberg of unstructured data. We have a bit that's structured, and so something that I've been seeing in industry, I'm a researcher at Virginia Tech, but something that I'm seeing in industry is that we're using structured data as training data to then structure the unstructured data. And then that way we're able to kind of streamline the structured data so that you have more diversity in the data. Because if you think about it, you have inherent bias in your data if you're not using all of the data that's available because it's unstructured, right? So if you utilize the training data, the existing structured data as training data to then test the unstructured data, it will allow you to kind of clean that data. Now, in terms of how to do that, most companies don't necessarily have in-house data scientists or data architects, so that would maybe be to perhaps some of the vendors in the room that have solutions for that. But I would recommend that that's something to look at in terms of the capability. That's what you should be looking for.
I'll actually respond as a part of the vendor community that was traditionally a company that dealt with information governance. And I think that's where we were talking about connecting some of these areas in the agencies that aren't necessarily speaking now. So we have been in with the DoD and NARA and others thinking about information governance and archiving. Well, we're actually in a very natural place to think about where your data lives, how to categorize that data, how to make sure that you're being compliant with FOIA, with your other internal policies, and then tagging it and categorizing it to feed into a model. So I think it's that intersection of records management with AI, with your CDO or your information officer that's going to give you a more holistic and compliant and curated solution. Yeah.
And I will keep adding to, in this table is answering that question. To be more specific about how we're, like in my case, I'm tackling the data quality issue, it is embracing a common data model. So in healthcare, like right now, I have about 30 million patients, about 20 years worth of their data. So we have changed systems over the years and so on. So the data quality is poor. So what we have been doing, an initiative that we started about 2 years ago, which should be completed hopefully within a year, it is mapping our data into a common data model so we know what is a patient, we know what is an encounter, what is a medication, and so on. So that is improving our data quality. Therefore, it will result in better models that we can train for military health.